Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Our resource person has arrived along with the other guest. So, without much ado, on behalf of Kokala Government College Fraternity, welcomes all the guests in today's this August gathering. So, let us begin with welcome dance. So, I request the students of Kokala Government College to perform a welcome dance in honor of our guest, welcoming him and his friends. Ladies and gentlemen, now let us welcome our resource person, Dr. Ankur Barua, who is from the Faculty of Divinity, University of Cambridge, working as University Senior Lecturer in Hindu Studies to our college. So I request Ms. Anamika, Vice President, Komal Government College Students Union, to welcome Sir Bijan Aranai. Thank you, sir, for accepting our welcome, and thank you, Ms. Anamika. Now I'd like to request our Honorable Principal Madam to inaugurate this lecture session.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Already we had first morning session of today's lecture series. We had 2 lectures. First half in the morning for the students and now for the faculties. And already we have given introduction of Dr. Ankur Barua, we all know. And now I would like to request Dr. Sanghamita Chaudhary to introduce him amongst us once again. And with that, I do formally declare that today's second lecture series is open. Sanghamita, to you.
Thank you, madam. Thank you so much. A very good afternoon, everyone. Before we begin today's program, I, Sanghamitra Chaudhary from Bodoland University, would like to extend a warm greetings to all of you and thank the principal of Kokrajhar Government College, Dr. Vanapita Brahma Madam, to organize this orientation program in a very short notice and on a very pertinent topic, writing quality papers and career building for the scholars and the teachers of this college. I really appreciate you, ma'am, organizing this event in such a short notice. Along with Dr. Brahma, I must express my gratitude to Dr. Ankur Barua, our resource person today, who graciously accepted our request to visit Kokrajhar. We are incredibly fortunate to have Dr. Barua, a faculty from the University of Cambridge in the UK, who is with us today. Sir, we thank you for accepting the invitation and taking time out of your busy schedule to visit us for our scholars and teaching fraternity. We are pleased to have you here and sincerely appreciate your thoughtfulness. Now, let me introduce our resource person to you before we get started. Dr. Barua is currently a faculty at Cambridge University. He studied theology and religious studies at Faculty of Divinity in Cambridge after earning a BSc in physics from St. Stephen's College, Delhi University. His main area of interests are Indo-Islamic social structures and Vedantic Hindu philosophical theology. He studies the conceptual arguments and social structures of Hindu traditions both in pre-modern South Asian context and in colonial societies where various concepts of Hindu identity were arranged. Also conventional routes connecting India, Britain, France, Germany and the United States. He has got a long list of publications that includes, but not limited to, The Divine Body in History, a comparative study of time, embodiment in the theologies of St. Augustine and Ramanuja, debating conversion in Hinduism and Christianity that he has actually talked about in the morning session, and the Vedantic relationality of Rabindranath Tagore, the Brahma Samaj, the Hindu self and its Muslim neighbors, and so on and so forth. He has got a long list of publications. Despite the fact, and we are very fortunate to have him with us today, despite the fact that Dr. Ankur Barua teaches and studies the conceptual constellations and the social structures of the Hindu traditions, largely in South Asia, the topic for today's discussion was chosen with the interest of the young researchers in mind. I'm confident that our students and scholars will be extremely motivated after listening to Dr. Barua's presentation and will be able to plan their future careers as well. Our students are currently exposed to an increasing number of opportunities, whether they are in academics or other co-curricular activities. So thank you all of you and welcome all of you once again to this special orientation program. Thank you so much.
Hello everyone. Today I'm going to share with you some of my thoughts and reflections on how to write an academic article. Now looking at people around me here, I can see maybe at least 5 people or maybe even 6 people who were present at the first lecture. So I will try not to repeat too much stuff so that you won't get too bored. Now, before I do what I said I would do, share with you some of my reflections on how to write academic English, let me just start with some general considerations about the significance of writing these articles. As you know, one of the criteria that people judge you on, assess you, our own trajectories, is the quality of your academic research. And to do this, you have to publish articles in peer-reviewed, double-blinded peer-reviewed journals. But I do not know how many of you are here from the sciences, how many are from the social sciences, from the humanities. And depending on what kind of an article you are trying to write, what I'm going to say will be very different. Right? So if you are in geography or philosophy, the kind of articles you will write and how you will go about writing it is going to be very different from, say, if you are in physics or chemistry or some other scientific discipline. So my thoughts today are mainly going to be targeted at you, assuming that you are from the humanities or the social sciences. So if you are in physics or statistics or chemistry, the methodological style may be significantly different. Now, here is one, before I proceed, I should also clarify that my comments today will not be at the level of content, it will be at the level of form, right? That is, I'm not going to discuss how to write an article on a very particular topic like the concept of time in the Bhagavad Gita, or the problem of A, B, and C in Manipur, right? So I'm not going to discuss content, I'm not going to discuss matter, I'm going to discuss form, the overall style of presenting arguments, developing arguments. Now, here is one image that I often give to my MPhil and PhD students when they come to me and say, what should be my mental attitude, my mentality, which I should cultivate, develop in writing something, and I give them this image. So let's say in the next room, there is a conversation going on, and the conversation has been going on for the last, say, 50 years, or sometimes even 500 years, okay? And all of us are invited to go to that room and participate in that conversation. Now, what is going to happen usually, before we will be allowed to speak, they would want to know whether we understand what that conversation is about. They would want to know whether we can re-articulate, reformulate what they have been talking about for the last 50 years or 500 years, which means that we would have to read a lot of secondary literature, right? So often what happens is that, you may think, okay, academic research is about picking up a book and just writing your thoughts and reflections on it. For better or for worse, that's not how it works. So if you want to express your opinions on what a particular text says, yes, you should express your opinions, but the way to go there is by situating yourself in an ongoing conversation. So before we start speaking to people in the next room, we will have to listen to them. We will have to listen to them very carefully, understand what moves they're making, what they're saying, what words they're using, what words they are not using, what arguments have been developed, what have not been developed. So we have to find our niche, we have to find our location on that spectrum, on that continuum of developing arguments. And having done that, listen very carefully to what people are saying. That is how we begin to develop a voice of our own. Right? So the point is that we learn to speak by listening. Before we start writing and say, here's the argument, which nobody else has said so far, or here's the answer, which has never been heard before. When I see people talking like that, I can often say to myself, well, this is an argument which you can already find in the secondary literature, if only you had read it. So, read a lot of secondary literature, and in the process of listening to what people are saying, we begin to find what is the gap that we wish to address. That is how we participate in the conversation. Now, what I've given you here is just an image, and I'm going to do, in the next, say, 15 minutes or so, I'm going to share with you on these slides some of my thoughts on how to concretely implement this image. The image being that there's a conversation going on in the next room, and before we can start talking or participating in this conversation, we have to figure out what the conversation is about. Now, what you see here on this slide here is a certain image of what a beautifully constructed argument should look like. So let's say, just to keep things very simple on this occasion, I'm only going to focus on research articles, which are usually 8,000 words or 10,000 words. Okay? So let's say, here we have a problem, and here's a problem. We have to write an article in 8,000 words, 10,000 words in the next 6 months. Okay? So let's take it very concretely. How are we going to do this? How would I go about writing an article in 8,000 words, 9,000 words? 6 months is actually too short, so let's say 1 year, or let's say 1.5 years. Okay? So what I would do, I would spend about 6 to 8 to 9 months just reading. right? Reading and taking notes extensively. And here, before I proceed, I should say some of the things I'm going to say here are going to be descriptive, not prescriptive. So I'm not prescribing to you that this is the method to follow. I'm just describing how I do it. So for about 9 to 10 months sometimes, I just read and I take notes. I take a huge amount of notes. In fact, in the morning I was telling some people here that I have this massive Word document which runs into about 750,000 words. And these 750,000 words I have accumulated not in 1 year, not in 1 day, in about 25 years. For the last 25 years, whenever I read a book or I read an article, I make some notes. I rephrase, paraphrase the argument in my own words so that there's a paper trail. So everything I have read over the last 28 years, in principle I can go back because the Word, as you know, has this facility called search. So I just search, okay. This particular keyword, what have I read on this particular theme or topic over the last 25 years? Now that is how I have got there, like, you know, this huge amount of content. So likewise, let's say to make things even more concrete, because it was noted that I have written a book on the philosophy and the theology of Rabindranath Tagore. So I spent about 3.5 years just reading Tagore. So there are 28 volumes of Tagore's complete works. And day in, day out, I did nothing but read. And I took notes, extensive amounts of notes. Then what happened? I realized, well, just because you have lots of notes, you don't have an argument. You need to develop an argument. And what the argument should look like is what I try to capture with this image. So if you look at this image, I ask people, what is the first thing that comes to your mind when you see this image? At least this morning I was told this image reminds them of a dome. And possibly it is a dome from a mosque or from a church somewhere in Europe. But what I'm trying to convey to you through this image is an image of harmony, of order, of structure, of pattern. If you look at the details, they're so minute, so intricate. And yet all these details, all these minute patterns are interrelated to cohere around one central axis. It is like the axle in a wheel, right? When you have a wheel in a bicycle, if the axle or the spoke, if the axle were to be taken out, pulled out, all the spokes would fly apart. So what holds the argument together, the conceptual glue, the cement, is that axis. So no matter how long the article is or the essay is going to be, 8,000 words or 9,000 words, it should be possible to say what the argument is in one sentence. And here's one image. Suppose I ask you as a fellow scholar, as a fellow academic, what is the argument that you are trying to develop in this article? To me, it is okay to say, you know, this is an extremely complicated topic and you go on and on and on for 5 minutes, it's okay. But suppose your best friend from school asks you, what is it that you are trying to do? You can't talk to him or her like that. You just have to say, this is it, here's the answer. And that, here is the answer. In so many words, very simply, precisely, concisely, is that spoke, is that axle I'm talking about. The only problem with this image I'm developing is often, it is only after we have spent a lot of time writing, rewriting, rethinking, rereading, that we realize what that spoke is in the first place. So it is usually not going to be the case that you wake up on Monday morning and realize, okay, here's the argument, let me develop it from Tuesday to Saturday. If that were to be the case, life would be very easy for us. Like I will give you an argument, okay, here's the argument, go home and develop it. Often it is only by working away, chipping away with your tools that you realize, okay, when you look back retrospectively, this is what I was trying to do. And the example that I often give is from my own experiences with peer review reports. You know, when you write these articles and send them to journals, it goes through a process called double-blinded peer review. So you do not know who your reviewers are, and they do not know who you are. And they write these reports. Sometimes they're very precise, very long, 2 pages. Sometimes they're very short, like 1 paragraph. And often it happens to me that report I get says something like this. Here on page 45 or here on page 3, you have developed this argument. And this is a very good argument. Why don't you develop this? And when I get this peer review report, it's only then I realize sometimes that that actually is a very good point, that I should have developed this. So retrospectively, I realized what I was trying to say on Monday, on Saturday. So it's only at the end of the week that you realize where to start from. And in the end lies our beginning, as they say. I mean, when you think about it, that's a paradox. You can say our beginning should lie in the beginning. But often with many different human experiences, it's only when we go through a process you realize what was the significance of the entire process. Now, to go back to what I'm saying, therefore, let's say I have been reading for about 3.5 years, and I've been taking notes for about 2 years. Then what I do, I begin to read through these notes, and often I just take a small fine printed Times New Roman font size 11, and I take a print out of that whole thing. So that entire document could run into 150 pages in a very fine print. And I spend about 2 months doing nothing but just reading through those notes. Just keep on reading them, rereading them. Just think of these notes like a vast sea, like a river, and you are submerged in that river. And then after, let's say, 1.5 months, I try to come up with the surface to catch a gasp of air. And then what I will do, I will project a hypothesis. I will say, this central spine or this central axis is this. And I write it out in 5 sentences. And I think of it as a hypothesis. I don't know whether it will change. Often it will change 5 days later, or 5 weeks later, or 5 months later. But after this intense period of reading, rewriting, rethinking, reflecting, I will formulate a hypothesis, call it hypothesis 1.0, and I will write it out in, say, 5 sentences, but not more. And then what I do, I pick up 1 or 2 topics right in the middle of the argument, and I start working backwards. Right? So here is the introduction, which I've written out very quickly in 5 sentences. Then I project that this is the argument, and then I don't worry too much about how the argument will develop. I just take up one big theme right from the middle of the argument and try to develop it sideways. So the image that you can think of in trying to understand what I'm saying is trying to build a bridge from 2 ends of a river, right? So here's a river, and I'm building a bridge from this end, and I'm building a bridge from the other end, and the skill and the point of building a bridge is that somewhere they have to meet in the middle. Like if I have a bridge which goes like this, and this is not a bridge, it's just 2 different disconnected parts. So here's my hypothesis, which I write out in 5 sentences. And now I'm going to work backwards. And if I realize that they don't properly align, then I'm going to rewrite this introduction, and I'm going to rewrite what I'm arguing here so that they become aligned. Now, of course, when you read my articles, you only read the final product. You only read this. You don't see all the blood and sweat and tears that went into this realignment of trying to organize the introduction and the main body in such a way that they fit. So here is the struggle. And writing academic prose, for that reason, as I always say, is, to begin with, very difficult. It is very difficult, and it's very painful, and it's very laborious. But there is a great amount of joy, satisfaction that at least I derive from it. Because whenever I try to write anything, this is the kind of vision that I have in mind, that I'm going to create something like this, some kind of harmony, some kind of order, some kind of structure. And that vision gives me a lot of mental and intellectual satisfaction. A slightly different image, which I used again in the morning today, is how in a shawl or a scarf or a tapestry, you often have one golden thread that runs through the entire structure, the whole tapestry. And the entire tapestry revolves around that golden thread. So if I were to pull out that thread somehow, the entire tapestry will just fall apart. And that golden thread, in the case of the article in 10,000 words, is that central argument. So when you're writing, and this is what I tell myself, when I'm writing, what I'm really after is to be able to say 10,000 words in 1 sentence. And you can see, it's an impossible idea, it's not going to be easy to say 10,000 words in 1 sentence. And what I mean by that is that that 1 sentence should be so precise that in principle you can unpack it to become 10,000 words. Right? And that 1,000 words which contains in principle 10,000 words is like the ceiling of a canopy. So that we are beneath the canopy or beneath the ceiling. All the details will follow subsequently. But if I ask you, what is it that you are saying? And if you say, what I'm arguing is so complex that I will need 1 day to explain it to you, then nobody has the time to do that. You just need to be able to say, okay, what I'm going to say is very difficult, but let me help you. Here it is. Here it is in 1 sentence, this is it. And we all agree that no argument is simple. There will always be more complications, qualifiers, disclaimers, footnotes, and endnotes. But when you're able to do this, say, here is the argument in 1 simple sentence, what it does for you is that it helps you to clear up your mind. It gives you this clarity of vision. And what it does to the reader is that the reader understands you. So it's a win-win situation. if you're able to formulate 10,000 words in one sentence. Again, I'm not suggesting that this is easy, like the example I gave you of 3.5 years of reading, 2 years of writing, and a long time of writing and rewriting. It is a very laborious painstaking process. But what I'm showing you here is the end product. In principle, the end product should look like this. So we are participating in a conversation, trying to figure out what is the language that is being used. Academic English, as you know, is not quite the same as English we would use to discuss the weather when you're having tea. You need to learn a certain kind of vocabulary. Often technical words are used in a very specific way. You have to figure out how the word is being used by sociologists, how that same word is being used by historians, how the same word is being used by anthropologists. There are maybe some measure of overlap, but there could be significant differences, how different scholars use different terms. So you have to socialize yourself into that style of writing, reading, thinking. And by socializing yourself in that style of reading, writing, thinking, you begin to develop your voice. Now, all of these are somewhat general comments, let's say at 20,000 feet. What I'm now going to do is slightly break it down into something more concrete and show you just 2 slides. So here is a slightly different version of the previous slide which I showed you, where I say the central theme is structure, harmony, organization. Here are 3 main components to keep in mind when writing anything, whether it's 50 words, 500 words, 5,000 words, 10,000 words. And this is the form of 3 S's. So you can see syntax, sense, and structure. So I always start with syntax, because for me, syntax or grammar is the very baseline of thinking. No matter what is the language, Bodo, Assamese, Bengali, Sanskrit, Latin, Persian, if a sentence is not grammatically structured, there's no meaning, there's no thought. Right? Often people have this sort of a mentality that, okay, in my mind I have a beautifully formed argument, but when I try to write it out, things go wrong. And what that says to me is that in fact you don't have a beautifully formed argument in your mind. Because there cannot be 2 different languages, one called the language of thinking, the other called the language of writing. In principle, there should be a good correspondence between the language of thinking, if there is such a language, and the language of writing. Because when you think about it, what is this language of thinking? It is after all a natural language, like Assamese or Bodo or Bengali or Sanskrit. There's no supras beyond language, language of thinking. All language of thought is language, just like the language I'm using now, called English, to speak. So, if there is going to be meaningful conversation, communication, syntax or grammar has to be the baseline. But simply making grammatical statements in any natural language does not make us a scholar. Right? So here are 3 grammatically correct sentences. I am now in Kokrajhar, the sky is blue and the grass is green. These are 3 grammatically correct sentences. But did I become a scholar just by enunciating these 3 sentences? No. So what is the next step then? The next step, what you see there is sense. So we have to be able to connect these sentences, which are units of thought, which are meaningful in such a way that they are interrelated and interconnected. Sorry, can I just check if that is my bag?
Yeah. No. Yours is there.
All right, sorry, yes. So here is one very concrete example of what I mean by sense, is that in English, and for that matter, different languages, but in English we have these logical connectors. Say, however, therefore, since, because. And sometimes I read and reread a paragraph, and I'm not able to make good sense of the paragraph. And then I realize part of the reason is that therefore should actually be a however, or that however should actually be a because, or that since should actually be a for. So if you keep on moving around, playing around these logical connectors, and you turn them upside down, the fabric of thought becomes destabilized, right? What the way we would like to think is, this is the premise, this is the basis, and on the basis of X, I'm arguing Y. But if that is what you're thinking in the language of thought in your mind, but what you're writing is the reverse of it, that because of Y, X follows, I will not be able to understand you. I will not be able to understand what I'm reading. And often it happens not just to you, it happens to me. When I read work which I have written, let's say 3 years ago or 4 years ago, I am often kind of horrified, by the mistakes I have made, by the blunders I have made. Because I can now see, back then, 3 years ago, when I was writing out something very rapidly, I had jumped across these fine points of logic. A links to B and not B links to A. So that's what I mean by sense. And finally comes structure. But structure is just what it says on the label, that if you write 10,000 words, 9,000 words, there is going to be an introduction, there is going to be a main body, 3 components, 2 components, there is going to be some kind of a summary. So one way to think of structure is in this way. Let's say somebody comes to you and says, okay, what do you have to say? And you are trying to develop a narrative, you're trying to tell a story. And here is one way to tell a story, among many others. You start with an introduction. And the introduction is just what I said in the beginning, that you are being invited to the other room. And you go to the other room and you report on what's happening. That's the introduction. So I have visited this hall B and I heard 3 people talking about a certain problem, A, B, and C. You report the problem as accurately as possible. And then you say, but I did not hear something else that I would like to tell you now. Or the way you were speaking does not quite make sense to me. Or the way you are speaking is all right, but let me show you another way of speaking. Or the way you are speaking is all right, but there are some problems with the way of speaking which I can improve on. Right? So as you can see, there are so many different moves you can make. So all of this is in the introduction. You're reporting an ongoing conversation, and you're telling me as your reader why you are not quite satisfied with the conversation. What is the precise move you would like to make? Having done this, what you're going to do, you're going to make some promises. And promises look like this. In this article, I will argue that A, B, or C. Or in this article, I will revisit this debate. Or in this article, I will develop a critique of this, right? So there are so many different moves you can make. And the key point to remember is that the article should reflect those promises. So when I reach page 10 or page 12, when the article is going to come to an end, if I do not get a sense of ending, I feel that, you have made all these promises on page 3, but at least, well, let's say none of them were fulfilled. You made 3 promises, maybe 1 was fulfilled at the most. So what we have to do is to aim at the symmetry between what you promised on page 3 and what we do fulfill on page 10. Now, this is not what I want to show, and here is one last slide, and then I will stop. So, to all my PhD and students, I just give them something like a 101. It's like a sheet that they have. So I tell them that whenever you write anything, whether it's 3 sentences, 300 words, 30,000 words, just do this almost quasi-mechanical check. It's like an algorithm. Just keep on ticking these boxes. Every time you write a sentence, go through this whole list, tick 4. Go through this whole list, tick 4. So the first one is the most basic stylistic formal point, typo 0. Typographical errors, we may think are so superficial. Who worries about typos? Now, some typos are very straightforward, and we can understand what is going on. So if I write, the grass is green, okay, that's a clear typo. But sometimes it's not so obvious, whether it's a typo, or a grammatical mistake, or a factual error, or it's a problem in the logical connector. So if I find a certain typo, I can be charitable to you and say, okay, this person was just having a bad day, was feeling sleepy, and it's just a typo. But not every reader is going to be charitable to you. Some reader may say, this in fact is not just a typo, it's a major error. And what you have to remember is that academic writing is very different from having a conversation. If I'm having a real-world verbal conversation with you, I don't understand you or I misunderstand you. I can actually ask you, what did you mean? Can you please repeat it? Can you please paraphrase it? Or if you think I have misunderstood you, would you not correct me there and then? Say, no, you misunderstood me. This is it. But when people read your articles out there, let's say you have written an article now, somebody in Canberra in Australia is reading that article right now, how would this person know whether this is a typo, or whether it's a real factual error, or whether it's an error in the logical connector, or whether you simply were having a bad day? Which one is it now? Now I can ask you, which one is it? I mean, did you have too much coffee in the morning? Are you having a headache? Are you feeling sleepy? Or did I misunderstand you, right? There's a direct tool back and forth. So it's very crucial. In one sense, this may look very trivial. You may say, no, I'm such a big academic, I don't worry about typos. Typos can bring down an entire argument, right? And if we do not have this attention to detail, in a certain sense, attention to detail is the baseline. That's where it starts from, right? We should not be worried too much about 80,000 words or 40,000 words. What we should be really worried about is writing one sentence and writing it correctly. So that's typo 1. Then that's number one. And number two, holistic narrative is just what I was saying a little while ago, that when you write 10,000 words, the whole thing should, at the end of the day, look beautiful. And what I mean by look beautiful, it should feel it is structured around one central center, one central pivot. So let's say I've been reading an article, 10,000 words, and let's say it has taken me about 4 hours to read this article. And I read the very last sentence, and I put the article on this table, and I go out for a walk. What I'm going to ask to myself, what was that whole thing about? And I'm going to say, yes, that was the takeaway. Here is the argument. And this is what I mean by a holistic narrative. The entire thing, 10,000 words, with very complex arguments, with lots of endnotes, footnotes, secondary literature, various kinds of sub-arguments, different pathways, they all come together. They all hang together, fit together as one synthetic narrative, as one synthetic fabric. So this sense of a holistic narrative, if I'm able to communicate to you through what I've written, you will feel that, no, there was a takeaway. I have learned something new today. Okay, here it is. This is what I've learned something new. Whereas if what I'm giving you is not the holistic narrative, but 20 different narratives in the name of one, just as like say you claim to be writing a PhD thesis, but it turns out that you are not writing one thesis, you're writing 5 different theses. You're writing 5 different theses in each chapter. I don't get a sense of a holistic narrative. I don't finish your 80,000 words in 7 days and go for a walk and say, okay, what was that about? And I realize I don't know. I don't know what was that about, because there are 7 different theses going on in the name of one. So in 10,000 words, I should have this takeaway feel. Okay, so this is what I take away from 10,000 words, and here it is. And this is going to be possible if, as I say here, all promises which are made on page 2 or page 3 are redeemed, are fulfilled at the end. And if they are not, to go back to the image of the bridge, so here is my bridge analogy again, on page 2 or 3 I'm making all these promises. As I'm working backwards, I realized I can't actually make these promises. Why? For all kinds of reasons. One could be because I need a word count more than 10,000. I can't do it in 10,000 words. And another could be, this argument is quite complex, cannot be developed here. So what I will have to do, I have to recalibrate my first move and my second move, so that I will drop some points here and bring it in alignment with what I've actually said at the end. So it says there, make sure that all promises such as we will see are correlated with what you see at the end, as we have seen. Then comes the other point, which is very crucial actually when we are writing articles, because articles have a very specific word count, which is about 8,000 words or 9,000 words. Some articles these days, some journals these days only allow you to go up to 5,000 words. So what it means is that we have to cultivate a kind of conceptual economy. That is, if you can say 3 things with 5 words, you should say it with 5 words and not use 6. That is, if you keep on adding 1 word to each sentence, it adds up, and you will realize you have already used up 300 words or 400 words or 500 words. So how to say what you want to say with the least possible number of words, with the greatest amount of conceptual economy, and that is again a very difficult virtue, it's a very different skill. And the reason why I use these words, virtue and skill, is because these kinds of things, one does not wake up one morning and just pick it up like that. It has to be cultivated. It's almost a kind of a spiritual discipline, if you want to put it that way. It requires years sometimes, weeks definitely, months of constant laborious disciplined training. Training the mind to think in a certain way. Training the mind to set out an argument, develop it across 5 pages, and keep on checking all these boxes. Is difficult, hard work. Now, repetition counter is what I mean to say here is that if I'm repeating the same argument, same point, same thesis, in the same paragraph, in an article which is to be written out in 8,000 words, I would say that is too much repetition. If you're writing a book which runs into sometimes 95,000 words, some amount of repetition within the same chapter is fine. Some amount of repetition across chapters is not only fine but even required, because you need to keep on reminding the reader, look, I'm on chapter 4 now, but just to remind you, this is what I said in chapter 2 in case you've forgotten, and I'm in chapter 5 now, but just to remind you, this is what we were discussing in chapter 3. That's okay with a book, because with books, the word count can be as high as 95,000 words, sometimes even 110,000 words. But here you're writing an article in 8,000 words, or even worse, 5,000 words. You simply cannot afford to repeat yourself. So you go through the entire draft and make sure that if a point has been repeated, and by repeated I just don't mean writing of the same sentence. Even if you are paraphrasing the content of a sentence, you are saying, in other words, this is what it is. There is no need to say in other words. In 5,000 words, your reader will get it. In other words, or as you have seen, these formulations are good for writing books. 95,000 words, 110,000 words. So that's repetition counter. And finally, technical meter, I mean, this point may or may not be relevant to you depending on what discipline you are in, but it's quite relevant for me because my students come from different disciplinary perspectives. Some of them are more sociologically inclined, some of them are more historically trained, some of them they have a very strong base in philosophy and so on. So in the humanities and the social sciences, what happens is that certain words are used in a very highly technically precise way. And this happens often with philosophy, but it happens also to some extent with political theory, with sociology, with anthropology. Certain words are used in a certain way, which may not be the sense you find in the Oxford English Dictionary, right? And what you have to make sure is that you have to be consciously aware that when I'm using this word, I may seem to be speaking to you at tea, having a general discussion, but this word has changed, has shifted in its meaning, in its range of meanings. And that is what you must acknowledge and you must tell the reader. So the point of all of these four criteria, if you want to put it this way, to summarize all of them is this. Think of it this way. Suppose you have written an article in 8,000 words, 9,000 words. For whom have you written this article? Let's say for people, right? And why have you written this article? Let's say to help them to understand what you have written. Which means that you have to aim, I have to aim, all of us have to aim to write in a way that is reader-friendly, right? If our writing style is not reader-friendly, then what's the point? If it turns out that on reading what I've written, I only increase the amount of suffering in the world by making people think, okay, what was that about? And it takes them 5 hours to understand 3 pages. What was the point of writing that? I'm not writing it in a way that is reader-friendly. And why is that so? Because I'm not self-critically aware of how I write, how I think, how I rewrite, how I rethink, right? So the sum and substance of these 4 criteria is to develop a style of writing which is lucid, which is transparent, just like the light in this room, right? We don't question the light. It is in this light we see everything. So likewise, if you can develop this reader-friendly style of writing, and I'm giving you some very concrete pointers as to how to develop this reader-friendly style of writing, that is, keeping the reader in mind. And here's another image that I sometimes give to my students, which is this. One of the biggest struggles of writing academic English or academic prose is this, that we are writing a highly technical style of English, and the content is of course very technical and specialized. But for whom are you writing? When you write this, I tell my students, don't think that you're writing for me. That's the worst thing that you can do. Because if you think you are writing for your supervisor, your style will become very tense and obscure. Do not think that you're writing for an academic. You're writing for the best. Think that you're writing for your favorite human being, whoever that is. Your mother, your spouse, your friend, or it could be your pet dog, or it could be your cousin, whoever it is. And you think that you are not writing for your supervisor, you are not writing for an academic, you're writing for your pet dog, you're writing for your cousin sister, you're writing for your aunt, who is sitting in front of you. And write in such a way that even though the material you are discussing is highly technical and specialized, in principle, your mother or your cousin sister who has never entered the hallways of academia, in principle should be able to understand it. So you have to write in such a way, such a reader-friendly way, that you take your mother or your sister or your pet dog, step by step by step by step by step. So you take them from what is more obvious to what is less obvious, what is easier to what is less easy to understand, what is more intelligible to what is less intelligible, right? You hold them by the hand and guide them through this very complex terrain of argument, of discussion, of critical scholarship. And you are doing this because you are, as I say, the image I gave you, you are writing in a reader-friendly style for your mother, for your pet dog. And think about this. If your pet dog, in principle, can understand your argument, who can possibly misunderstand you, right? Whereas if your mother can understand you, who has never studied, say, history or philosophy or sociology or political theory or anthropology at the university level, has not done a PhD or an MA, in principle, she can understand you, your father can understand you, your brother can understand you. And that is, let's say, in one sense, the worst possible case. If you can meet the worst possible case, any academic will understand you. And what that means is that although the content you are discussing, you are developing, is going to be quite technical, we all get it. Like, I mean, academic writing often goes through deals with very complex issues. The style of writing is going to be transparent, lucid, and very clear. And because the mentality, the motivation that is shaping your writing is what? Is to help people. And help people do what? Help people to understand something. And if they understand something, they know something. So you would rather increase the amount of knowledge in the world than increase the amount of suffering in it. So think of it this way. Every time you are going to write a sentence which is obscure, which is not clear, implicitly you are going to make somebody sitting in Melbourne, in Australia right now, who is reading that sentence, go through a lot of mental turmoil. And if we don't want that to happen, we have to write with that intention. Now, of course, whether we will succeed or not is not for us to know. So when I write my sentences, have I increased the amount of knowledge or suffering in the world? What is it? I don't know what I've done. This is what is called reader response. Right? That is, you are my reader, you're able to respond in a certain way to what I've written. And because readers come from different perspectives, some of you may have read more history, some of you have read more sociology, some of you know more about A or B or C, the precise nature of the response cannot be anticipated. I cannot say, because I'm not omniscient, I cannot say, okay, here are 5 different possible responses depending on 5 different variables. I just project it out there in the world with this intention that I'm going to try to write with these 4 criteria in mind. Now, I can go on to discuss a few more things, but I think it would be better if I stop at this stage, because there are a few other things I would like to say which are kind of variations on what I've said so far, so I just don't want to labor the point. Instead of that, what I would do is I would just invite you to ask me any questions I have. Could be about the content of what I've said just now, very specifically, more generally about the skill, about the art of writing articles, technical questions, such as, I don't know, I mean, I'm sure there are some technical questions about how do you find out which journal to aim at, how do you find out, I can think of some more questions, but that is just to give you a sample of what you can ask me. So shall we go this way? That maybe you can ask me questions, and I will, depending on these questions, I can develop some of the points.
Actually, sir, I have some. Good evening, sir.
Yeah.
I have some problem regarding Indian philosophy while choosing a topic from Indian philosophy.
Okay.
First, as a beginner, it is very stupid problem, but I want to ask you. First problem is, I have a fear that experts have done it already in a fluent way. Second is fear of vastness in Indian philosophy. If I choose a topic, I have a fear that it is so vast. How can I complete? It is not enough. It is not enough. And the third is being skeptic about the authenticity. I become skeptic about what this book is interpretation or not, this book is more authentic, which book is more authentic. These are the 3 problems I face while choosing a topic.
I mean, I can sit down. Thank you. No, it's fine. I'm okay with this. Well, I mean, to begin with, I can assure you that you are not alone there. And these 3 anxieties or worries that you have articulated, I hear them from my own students all the time. Right? So, I can remember all 3, but the first question, the first point you mentioned was, it seems to you that somebody out there has already said it, right? Okay. And I can assure you, it is very difficult even for me to write anything on anything, because here's the paradox. This is it. That the more you read, the more you realize it's impossible to say anything new, right? That is, the more you read, you have already found out, okay, there is already an article out there, already a book out there. And this is why I gave you the conversational image in the beginning, right? Did I start off by saying, stand up and start writing? No, I say, stand up and go to the other room and listen very carefully to what they're saying. And saying something new, especially in a field like philosophy, new does not mean completely new under the sun, right? Say, there's a philosopher called Whitehead, he's an American British philosopher. He said, all Western philosophy is a series of footnotes to Plato. Right? That is, if you have understood Plato's philosophy thoroughly, in principle, the entire trajectory of Western philosophy after Plato to say Russell is already contained in principle in Plato's philosophy. So all Western philosophy is a series of footnotes to Plato, and we can repeat this example with, say, sociologists, with maybe historians, with anthropologists. So if you feel overwhelmed that it has already been said, what you have to keep in mind is that often in philosophical writing, the aim is not to say something new for the first time ever, right? Often what we do, we revisit an argument. And I can remember all the moves I highlighted in the beginning, but I gave you a sample. So let me see if I can remember. So one move could be, okay, what you are saying in the other room is good, but I think there's a certain gap, there's a certain lacuna. I'm going to address it. So that's one. Number two, what you were saying there is good, but you make 2 or 3 points which are simply wrong. And this is why, in my estimate, you are wrong. Okay. A third move could be, what you're saying is good, but you make certain mistakes, or, I mean, some of your claims can be qualified, can be revisited, can be redescribed, and this is why. So even though you are not saying something new, if by new you mean that no philosopher in the history of human thought in the last 3,000 years has had this idea, I can assure you, very few human beings have got there, right? To be able to think of a thought which has never been thought in the last 3,000 years, you would have to be quite lucky if you can think that, right? Simply because there are so many millions and millions and millions of billions of human beings in the last 3,000 years who have been thinking about these things, who have been discussing these ideas. So do not worry about originality, if by that we mean thinking a thought which has never been thought before. I'm showing you some possible moves you can make even without coming up with what you think is totally new. So that was the first anxiety, the first worry. The second worry was about how do I know if it is authentic or not?
Vastness, fear of vastness.
Yeah. Now, regarding the fear of vastness, I agree. This is a real worry, simply because of the sheer amount of publication these days. Right? Say, for example, right now my designation is Senior Lecturer in Hindu Studies at Cambridge, because this is the year 2022. If the year were 1922, my designation would have been something like Senior Lecturer in Religion, or Senior Lecturer in Religions of South Asia. Why? Simply because there was not so much publication in 1922, in 1822. You just need to have a certain understanding of a certain topic from 40,000 feet or 20,000 feet is done. Nowadays, although I say Senior Lecturer in Hindu Studies, even that is a misnomer, because really what I research is some Hindu movements, developments over the last 500 years. But as you know, the history of Hinduism is 2,000 years, 2,500 years. So academia by nature is so super specialized that it's very easy to feel overwhelmed simply by the amount of publication that goes on. So how does one handle this problem? Well, one straightforward way is to talk to your supervisor or talk to some scholar who is an established scholar. And what the scholar would usually be able to do, give you some compass points for navigating this landscape. And this person will be able to tell you things like this, that look, I agree that there are 500 books out there, and I know you have not read those 500 books, but don't worry, because if you do have time to read those 500 books, you will see that the content, the arguments in those 500 books, they fall into these 3 patterns, A or B or C, right? And this book, you don't have to start reading it all over again, because what it is really arguing is pattern A, and what that is usually arguing is pattern B, pattern C. So arguments, human arguments, because they are configured by human minds, not by supercomputers, they tend to fall into patterns. And how do I find out which pattern a particular book falls into? One solution is, as I said, talk to your supervisor, or talk to an established academic, or talk to a scholar who has been studying this for a while. Number 2, after a certain period in time when you have been reading books for a long time, you will realize that you yourself have the capacity. And this is how. Often what happens, a book may be 95,000 words, 80,000 words, but you have to go to the central core of the argument, and often the core of the argument is contained either in the introduction or in the conclusion. So what I often do, I quickly read the introduction, quickly read the conclusion, and get a sense for which way the argument is moving, and where I think the main argument is going to be developed. I try to locate it. Okay, chapter 4 or chapter 3. And now I'm sure you have spent many years reading books, and I'm sure you'll agree with me, or I hope you'll agree with me, that in any new book that you read in your field, only 10% is going to be really new. Isn't it not? Like 90%, what do we do in books? We just repeat everything that has been saying. Here's a literature review, so-and-so has said this, and there's the argument, and this is this, and there's the conclusion, and there are all these endnotes, footnotes. Your real significant contribution is somewhere on page 45 in the middle of chapter 3, or somewhere in chapter 5. And the skill is to go zoom into that 10%. And you see, you will yourself pick up this ability, the skill, to zoom into that main argument 10%, which is the core, the kernel. And all the remaining 90% is just paraphrasing, rephrasing in their own words, which in principle even you can do. Right? So when you read 500 books, you're actually reading 10% of 500, which is 50 books. And it may look like a huge amount of stuff one has to read, but the human mind, being a finite mind, being a finite structure, can only make finite moves. And that is how, number one, just talk to your supervisor or to an established academic. Number two, you will find out that you yourself have that ability to do this. So that's number two. There's no reason to get overwhelmed by the vastness of the scope. The third one is, how do I know which argument is authentic or not? Is that the point? Yeah, so that is quite kind of related to my second point. Again, it's a bit like asking, how do I know which is good tea, which is bad tea? You have to be trained to do this. Say, for example, I'm not a tree thinker, right? So, yeah.
Some last point was authenticity.
Yeah.
I concern it with the Sanskrit things,
Okay.
the some Vedic literatures,
Yeah.
this kind of thing.
Okay.
As we are modern humans, we are not expert in that kind of languages so much. So therefore, I develop a skeptic feeling about the authenticity. Maybe we fail to interpret it in the right way.
All right.
That is my problem.
Okay. No, but I think I understand your point, but your point is much more general than just reading Vedic literature. It's reading, trying to understand, make sense of any text which is written in a language like Greek or Latin or Sanskrit or Vedic Sanskrit. So how do we recapture what people were thinking in the 2nd century BCE when these thoughts are written in an archaic language like Greek or Latin or ... And again, the good news is we don't start in a vacuum. We don't wake up one morning on Sunday and say, okay, I now have to figure out what Plato really meant in his Greek or what the Vedas mean in Vedic Sanskrit. Often these literary, theological, religious, spiritual traditions, they have a tradition. So we have to look out for somebody who stands in that tradition, which is not to say that the person who stands in the tradition is going to give you the authentic view. But you can at least have a dialogical conversation and say, look, when I read the Vedas or some other ancient scriptural text, on my own, I arrived at this conclusion B. Now, what is your conclusion? If they say A, we can have a meaningful dialogue as to why do you think it is A? Who told you this? And this person may have said, well, my guru told me this, and his or her guru told me this, right? So this is the part of the tradition, the silsila. Now, how to measure authenticity is, of course, a big question. I mean, there's no foolproof method that will give us the right answer. Questions of authenticity, often they are resolved partly through conversation. Right? That's like saying, if I ask you the particular dress that you are wearing, the particular dress I'm wearing, is it authentic? Like, how would we answer this question? The answer is not yes or no. We will have to set some canons, some parameters of what counts as authentic in this particular aspect. And if we agree, then okay, this is what makes a certain style of dressing authentic. Then we can have a discussion.
Thank you, sir. It was very satisfactory.
Any more questions?
Hello everyone. Good evening, sir.
Yeah.
It was a very wonderful presentation indeed on your part.
Yeah.
Sir, I teach in the Department of English. I'm
Yeah.
Dr. Gopal Astalukdar.
Yeah.
I have a small query, sir. I have just recently conceptualized a topic on
Okay.
which I'm going to write a book.
Yeah.
So how do I go about publication
publishing it in a reputed publication house like Routledge.
Yeah.
I mean, how do I start
Yeah.
with the process?
Okay, yeah, so that's a very good concrete question, which has very significant ramifications. So usually what happens is that publishing houses like Routledge, Brill, OUP, they have made this process quite easy for you by coming up with their own questionnaire, right? So what they will ask you to do when you send them a certain proposal to answer, say, about 5 main questions. So number 1, a tentative title. And number 2, a brief overview, a synopsis of your argument in, say, 250 words. A breakdown, a schematic outline of the chapters, so you have the 5 chapters. And sometimes a detailed description in about 300 words of each chapter. Right? Then you have to specify which books are your competitors. And by competitors, what they mean is who has published books or articles or monographs on this particular topic, or if not on that topic, on a topic related to your topic. So what you are doing here, what they want you to do is to go back to my image in the beginning. They want to see from you whether you have been listening to the conversation. Right? That is, somebody has been publishing on this particular topic for the last 50 years, but you are not even aware of it. You don't want to be there. So you want to say, okay, look, I know that there are 5 books out there on a topic similar to mine, but this is why you should still read my book. And they want to see that from you. So you have to ask yourself, if there are already 4 or 3 books or 5 books on a topic related to yours, or maybe even worse on your topic, because that makes it even more difficult, and why should I read your book? Let's say, so I have already read those 4 books, and time is short, life is short, why should I spend my time in reading your book? And you should be able to persuade me in 250 words, this is why you better read my book. Because all that is good. No, again, there can be all kinds of reasons. One reason could be the last book on your topic was published in 1985. So it's time to have a rethink. We need to revisit this area. Or the last book was published in 2015, but there must be some reason why that book in 2015 made a mistake, let's say, somewhere. So you have to ask yourself. You have to ask yourself, why I, to put it concretely, who have read those 4 books, why should I be bothered to read your book? So that's one question that they're going to ask you anyway, right? So all you have to do is go through their questionnaire, which is usually uploaded on your website. I think they have usually 4 or 5 main questions. And if they're satisfied with your answers, these 5 questions, then usually what happens is that it goes through an internal review. So these publishing houses, they have their own editors. And if they think, okay, this is good, then this monograph, the manuscript, is going to be sent out for peer review. And then, then peer review reports will come to you, and they may ask you to significantly modify or revise some part, or they may say, well, this looks good, go ahead for publication, various possibilities are out there. Yeah, so that's usually how it works.
Thank you, sir.
But in principle, the question that you asked me could also be raised regarding how to publish an article.
Yes.
Like in 10,000 words, not just a book. That is, I have come up with a certain topic. How do I know, is it a good topic? How do I develop it? So again, you think, who has been writing on this topic? Or on similar topics? And if somebody has already written on that topic, why should I read yours? Life is short, time is short. Why is your article so important? Here it is. Right? You should be able to say it in one sentence. This is the reason why we need a rethink.
Yes, sir.
Yes?
I have one question. Whenever I read some articles, sometime, I used to get difficult to understand from the conclusion some of the articles. So how I can understand an article or any kind of journals that publish topics from the conclusion in a short period of time?
Yeah. So just to understand, I have understood your question. Your question is, sometimes when you read articles, you are not able to get a good sense of the conclusion. You don't know what the conclusion was about.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Okay. I can assure you, it happens to me all the time. Often when I read articles, because often what articles do, they don't follow my rules. There are 3 different articles in the name of one article, and it's not clear to me whether the point was A or B or C, or all of them, or B and not A or C. And then what I do is, I try to find references to that article in other literature. And often in another article, you will find a very precise summary of this article. If you're lucky, sometimes I do. If not, I will speak to colleagues, I speak to friends, I will speak to fellow scholars whom I know, so this is the significance of building up a network. If you have a network of colleagues and fellow scholars who work on similar topics, they don't have to work on exactly what you work on. But let's say if you're a historian of South Asia and this person is a historian of medieval Europe, that's good enough. Because often historians, they read across one another some disciplines. So you ask them, did you read this article? Or if they have not, just ask them to read this article and check their conclusion with yours. Right? So at the end of the day, it comes back, it boils down to a matter of networking. Because, just a matter of reader response, right? Like if you read this article, you may think this was the main conclusion. If I read it, I may think something else was the main conclusion. So if you don't understand what the conclusion is, I'm in very much the same boat as you are. Often even I don't understand what the main conclusion was. It seems to be that there are three different conclusions.
Thank you, sir.
Yes, go ahead. Yeah.
Okay, sir. In this one. Hello. Good afternoon, sir.
Yes.
So, I'm not from humanities. First of all, I'm from physics background.
Okay.
So nowadays, plagiarism.
He did graduated from physics also.
Yes, sir also graduated from physics. Now my question is, nowadays most of the universities are using strict plagiarism detection softwares.
Yeah.
Very strict.
Yeah.
What I have found is that in my case also, whenever I'm writing, so say a simple sentence we write, the voltage was measured. Okay, that voltage was measured, that line is coming in as plagiarized. Now the problem is that line is repeated in a physics article several times.
Yeah.
So that they are adding, the software adds that, and the voltage was measured is a general sentence, but that algorithm of that software does not understand.
Yes.
And as a result, the scholars, particularly in science stream, even after rephrasing, paraphrasing, these things do not work.
Yes.
So anything that from your side, how can we tackle that? We can take humanities. What happens is that rephrasing many times eliminates if you write new words, but in science stream it's very difficult.
Yeah.
So that's a question from my side.
No, that's a very good question. I'm actually aware of this problem, not just in the sciences, the physical sciences, but even in the humanities. Because often what happens is that even in the humanities, there's only so much you can do to paraphrase or rephrase. You can't keep on rephrasing yourself all the time. At the end of the day, the right person to talk to, you should ask, is not me, but somebody who owns a software. So what we need is somebody who writes a better program for a better software, which gives you a greater margin of error. So even in the humanities, the point is not 0% repetition. I think they allow you to go up to 10 to 15%, right? And that is the net. Because people understand that a machine does not think. The machine does not have a mind of its own. The machine has a mind which the software builder has put into the machine. Right? So possibly we need to persuade software builders to go up to 20%, go up to 15%, or maybe there is another way to develop a better mechanism to detect what is plain repetition, like the voltage was A or B or C, which is not material at all, and a much more complicated equation, which is very material. And so I don't have a solution to your problem, but I think this has to be addressed at the level of software. You just have to write a better program. And then, say for example, just to go back to the question of plagiarism, some of the rules, even I find it quite funny. So for example, there is a question of self-plagiarism. And I myself am never sure when I'm doing self-plagiarism or not. So for example, technically I'm doing self-plagiarism right now because I'm repeating content from my first lecture. Am I not? This is still self-plagiarism. I have shown you all these slides at 10 a.m. in the morning. I'm repeating them. So when I give lectures, the content of my lectures does not change significantly across years. I've been giving more or less the same lectures on the Upanishads and the Bhagavad Gita. So but there is possibly some way to handle this problem as well. But in principle, the point is that the question of plagiarism becomes very significant because, again, not so much in the sciences, but in the humanities. Often, people don't quite know people don't seem to understand the precise difference between supplying a quotation and paraphrasing a quotation, right? And when you are supplying a block quotation, scholar A or B or C says this, quote unquote. And often what we do is we kind of paraphrase it and say this is my argument. But actually a paraphrasing is still borrowing from somebody else's argument, right? So that distinction, once it is very clear in our minds, I think that is all that we need. I mean, some of the finer details can be left to the software developers.
I'm having one question.
Yes, go ahead.
Generally, when we good afternoon, everyone.
Yes.
So, suppose generally when we try to generate some objectives, like to provide, to calculate,
Yeah.
to analyze, to study,
To investigate,
to investigate,
explore.
to explore.
Yeah.
Now, in that case, what type of justification that we need to give? It is to provide, to study, so that it is more understandable, or we can give more information to the reader.
Yeah.
So, can you give a little focus on this?
Okay. Before I answer your question, what is your discipline?
I'm from computer science.
Computer science. Okay. So again, a content-based answer to your question will be very different from a content-based answer to say anthropology or history or something. But let me try to give you one concrete example. So what you see here is just a formal outline. As my friend here has pointed out, that I'm only making promises like I will investigate, I will explore, I will inquire, I will study, and you can have at least 5 more or 10 more different verbs. Now what the question is, can I give a concrete example of how it is that I have done something? Okay? Now in my case, because I'm at the end of the day, I'm a philosopher, and I study texts. So I don't go around carrying on, say, sample surveys, or I don't do ethnography, or I don't do field work. I study texts. I sit in a room, and I go through lots and lots of texts. So for me, to explore something, to investigate something, to develop something, and all of these verbs basically come down to this. Am I able to quote or cite a particular verse, or a sentence, or whatever, so some text, which reflects my argument? So I'm going to propose a way of, let's say, to make it very concrete, let's say in the 10th chapter in the Bhagavad Gita, that particular scripture, I'm going to argue that the 10th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, or a particular verse in the 10th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, has been read in A, B, or C way. And I, for whatever reason, have a problem with this way. I think that the right way to read this verse is not A, B, or C, but X or Y or Z. So then, because I work with text, in some way my task is made easier by the fact that the text is just out there. Nobody disputes that that is a text. What we dispute is how to read it. What we dispute is what is the overall significance of it. What we dispute is what are the implications of it. But that text out there we don't dispute. So I'm going to argue that the best way to read this text is A or B, not A or B or C, but X or Y or Z. And and the strength of the quality of my argument depends on my supporting arguments. Why do I say this? What reasons can I offer to you? So one reason could be that if I read this particular verse in way Y and not A or B or C, it makes general sense, overall sense in the light of the whole text. That could be one answer. Another answer could be, let's say, a very significant figure, let's say like Gandhi, has read it in way Y. Or if I read it in way Y, it makes better sense of the tradition as a whole. And these are some kind of supporting justifications or arguments that I can think of for why my reading Y is preferable to reading A, B, or C. And this is how I would go about arguing in a philosophical text. But if you're an anthropologist, that may not be sufficient. You may have to cite field work. You may have to say, I spent 3 months in this village somewhere in Nagaland or somewhere in Kohima or somewhere in Upper Assam or Lower Assam. And one morning when I woke up, this particular girl came to me and said this. Now you're going to report this ethnography. And on the basis of this ethnography, I'm saying this particular theory developed by an anthropologist is not so good. So the content-based moves will be very different depending on the particular discipline. Say, computer science, I'm sure you do not argue like this. I mean, you are going to draw certain equations or draw some equivalences, and either it is yes or no.
Thank you, sir. So, due to lack of time, we are going to wind join the previous discussion as a resource person is returning back to Guwahati. So I have been reminded by Dr. Sangamitra Madam that sir is returning back. So sir is returning. So as you are returning, so we will cut the program short. So finally, let's come towards the end of the program, and I request Mrs. Bonusri Bharadwaj to come and deliver a vote of thanks very briefly.
Thank you, Ashu sir. Honorable Resource Person Dr. Ankur Barua sir, Honorable Vice Principal sir, respected Dr. Sudeb Bosumutari sir, respected Dr. Sankamitra Chaudhary madam, respected Learned House, I am here to offer my vote of thanks. I would like to offer my sincere thanks and gratefulness to Dr. Ankur Barua, University Senior Lecturer from the Faculty of Divinity from Cambridge University. Despite having busy schedule, he has come to our college and presented a wonderful deliberation on the topic given here. So, a big thank you to you, sir. Thank you very much. So please give him a big round of applause. Thank you, sir. Next, I would like to offer my sincere thanks to all the dignitaries present over here for their present listening. I would also like to offer my sincere thanks to the technical member, Gugum and Alex, for their technical support. Last but not the least, I would like to offer my sincere thanks and gratefulness to Mr. P.V. Narjari for nicely anchoring this program. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mrs. Bonusri Bharadwaj, for offering the vote of thanks. So finally, we have come to the conclusion of this program. Thank you.